Good evening and welcome to the latest installment of Critics in Cars Getting Home.
And tonight we are driving home from the Hollywood Avondale and its brand spanking new light show out front. And we've just come from the New Zealand premiere of the new Nicolas Cage film Pig. And the story of Pig is pretty straightforward sounding. Nicolas Cage is a truffle hunter who lives alone in the woods in a cabin, and he's got a pig that he loves that helps him on the truffle hunting. And one day the pig is violently taken from him.
Pignapped. That's what I'm going to call it. He was pignapped.
Yes. And Nicolas Cage wants it back. And you're probably already imagining what this movie is, and you're completely wrong.
Yeah, it is not quite JOHN WICK with a pig. But for those of you, which I have not, who has seen Nick Cage's more recent film Mandy, you might very well be forgiven for thinking he's going to go crazy and he's going to exact some revenge and get that pig. No, as Doug says, it's not that sort of film.
Yeah, it's Nick Cage is going as deeply internal in this film as he goes external in most of his films.
In the opening, I noticed in the opening scenes, there's barely a word of dialogue. I think he says, "Hey girl, come over here."
Yeah. And also just the incredible stillness that he has through so much of it. It's just such a imploding performance almost, and you learn that that character really is imploding as he very quickly makes his way to the big city, which is Portland, Oregon, which for me, because I lived there 5.5 years, there's a lot that's very evocative in this film. And it winds up being really so deeply about its characters, I think. There's a moment about a third of the way through where it seems like it's going to be a really sort of an incisive commentary on the food chain and foodie culture, and that's ultimately what is going to, and what capitalism does to us all.
And can I just say that the film is ripe with really fantastic scenes of cooking, and it reminded me of that French film you didn't see called Delicious, which is about a chef creating work. You actually get to see them create food in a lot of it and talk about culinary things, right?
And it may be the only food film I've ever seen where recipes are specifically credited by their creators at the end of the film.
In the credits going up at the end. Amazing.
So it has its moments of being a foodie film, but backs away from that. It has its...
It's really interesting to me that it takes sort of a traditional... I was going to say gangster, but it isn't that. But it takes
thriller is how it's being advertised.
Sure, but it's a traditional sort of almost crime drama because it's a revenge drama, right? Somebody has something, it's taken from him, he cares about it, he goes to get it back.
And you have the unlikely partnership. Even you have Alex Wolff, who we've recently just seen in Old, as the young foodie, up and coming,
he's a total yuppie driving a yellow sports car.
Not even a yuppie. He's a millennial kind of.
Oh, sure. I guess in my language, he's a yuppie.
Yuppies are actually older than us.
Okay, sure.
Alex Wolff is not older than us.
But basically, he's like Nick Cage's. Sort of dealer, isn't he? He's the dealer to Nick Cage's supplier in a way, because Nick Cage supplies him with truffles and he sells them around the restaurants. So of course when the pig's gone, he thinks, well, this is something he needs to help out with because he has a vested interest in its return.
And also Nick Cage doesn't give him much of a choice.
Well, that's true.
To be fair. And Nicolas Cage has a very particular set of skills in this film, which basically consist of being able to cook, taking extraordinary amounts of physical abuse, and being able to look deeply into people's souls and say several words to them that destroy them.
It's really interesting that there are sort of almost caricatures, like Alex Wolff's sort of young, modern materialist dude, but everything is then turned on its head. And so, as Doug says, Nick Cage is desperately internal in all of his performance, and he receives violence, he receives blows, he receives insults,
and it's
more than he gives.
And I don't think there are many actors that could have made that work, because you're bringing the knowledge that it's Nick Cage and he could explode
at any time.
And you need somebody that you feel like, oh God, you don't want to. You just,
that's right.
You
think he's a ticking time bomb, and whether or not he is remains to be seen. But it's very interesting that the film does not immediately leap to those sort of of, it doesn't fulfill those assumptions that we have. And it becomes just a beautifully drawn, as you say, character portrait piece.
It's a film about grief, it's a film about trauma, it's a film about
loss and
family,
reminiscence and the power of good food.
Yeah.
The meaning.
There's a scene that's sort of like the sadistic riff on a scene in Ratatouille, which I won't get any deeper into, but when you see it, you'll get it. And then there's also the scene in the middle where he meets one of his proteges that is my favorite scene in the film. Kind of switches tones.
It does switch tone, yeah.
And goes from caricature, laugh out loud feeling to
poignant.
Desperate. I teared up during it, and it was not going in a direction where I expected it to, and that's the strength that, I mean...
So here's the thing, right? As you're already gathering, if you're still listening, watching, reading, it's quite difficult to pin exactly what this film's about and what it has to offer and why it's worth seeing. And I guess all we can really do is unreservedly recommend it. But without really being able to tell you... Well, we don't want to spoil anything anyway, but certainly not to really be able to tell you why, in a way. It's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. It's the debut feature film by Michael Sosinski?
No, Warnowski. Michael Sosinski is a wonderful critic who I support on Patreon, and you should too.
Okay. Michael Sarkovsky?
We'll let it go. They have the internet. The
debut film.
My only drawback, I would say, is I thought some of the handheld photography was a bit
I thought you
annoying.
wouldn't like that. Yeah, Doug's not a big fan of the old wibble wobble for no reason. I think so too. There were a couple of shots. I mean, there were
some of it was fine, and some of it just felt a bit like.
There's a time for handheld, and there's a time for not really. Just make an effort.
And then and there's one scene, for instance, in a bakery near the end that's just a locked off wide shot, extreme wide shot actually.
Yeah, but that's okay.
And that was beautiful. Yeah, and so seeing that he can employ those other modes, it felt even more like.
But the reason I sort of alluded initially to gangster or crime film is there's something quite charming about the fact that Robin, who is the Nicolas Cage character, to us initially he's an anonymous guy living in a cabin by himself, not showering, which I have to say I was just like, dude, have a bath. And the more the film went on... and
2/3 of the way through, I was actually worried for the production crew, because I was getting increasingly convinced that not only had his character not showered, that Nicolas Cage had himself not showered for the entire film.
It's quite possible, because the continuity in terms of
method in
makeup and everything was extraordinary. But, let's not dwell. But... and now I can't remember on earth what I was saying about...
the one thing I'd say, there's an element where you start going in, like, you keep trying to reach for comparisons, and there's a moment like, it's kind of a Les Camp My Own Private Idaho, where there's a little bit of, maybe even Fight Club or something. There's all these little bits that kind of... But I feel like the closer you get to one of those comparisons, as with the John Wick one, immediately the farther you get away from what the movie really is.
Do you know what I think it's really like? Is Kelly Reichardt's recent film First Cow. I think it's a little bit like that, because it has that sort of almost not really languid pace, but peaceful kind of pace. Food and people loving what you create for them is sort of at the core of it. Yeah. So if you liked First Cow, you will like Pig.
But I would also say if you didn't like First Cow, you might like Pig as well, because this is more a bit more go-y, as people say.
That's right. I know what my gangster crime reference was, though. What I really was quite charmed by is the fact... Oh, now I don't want to spoiler it.
Don't spoil it.
So I'm not going to... So don't worry about it.
Just give me a rating, then.
Yeah, probably 4.5.
4.5. So...
What are you?
4.5. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap up now so that we don't bore you anymore, but definitely go check out Pig, and we'll see you next time.
Superlative acting, just such a greatly made film. Do it.
Yeah.